Hi, welcome to the Art Channel. We're in southwest London at Kew Gardens, looking at Marc Quinn's exhibition, Light into Life.
Marc Quinn is showing a series of sculptures in the gardens and inside the art gallery. These sculptures address the subject of human beings' relationship with the natural world and how they overlap.
Over the years, Quinn has produced a series of self-portraits using a silicone mould of his head and filled it with his own blood, so truly a self-portrait. For this exhibition, he's installed in this freezer unit the same kind of self-portrait mould, but he's filled it with coconut milk. We're in Kew Gardens, so that seems appropriate.
It's a big shift, isn't it? From using his own blood, which was very controversial at the time he first presented that series. Now, using coconut milk, extracted from coconuts which are commercially grown, it's fitting in Kew Gardens. We've got that idea of the human relationship to plant life and the world of plants and their exploitation. In the neighbouring cabinet, we have a work called Human Nature, and these are flowers made with animal blood. So you have that slightly abject notion of blood extracted and employed to represent flowers sculpturally. So there's that kind of arc from the organic to a representation of another organic form. It's strange and rather disturbing, isn't it?
Yeah, they're very horrible and very beautiful at the same time. It's, as you say, frozen blood, which is collected from abattoirs and used as a fertilizer. So it's a sort of a commercial product, but it's quite gothic. It's quite chilling. It's quite disturbing and nasty, actually.
But there's something very aestheticized about it, rather beautiful, suspended in these frozen temperatures, in apparent perpetuity.
DNA Garden, which looks like a Renaissance altarpiece, is actually the DNA of 75 plant species and 2 human beings. So quite democratic in that they're all laid out together. And really just speaking about our connection. You know, we talk about ourselves in relation to nature, but we are nature. So to see them together in this quite disturbing but beautiful altarpiece, it's quite fascinating.
Originally, he made a portrait of Sir John Sulston, who is a geneticist that is now part of the collection of the National Portrait Gallery. And I think one of the most interesting examples of contemporary art in that National Museum. And he develops this idea, Marc Quinn, of DNA being a representation of life rather than, as it were, a physical likeness you would expect from a traditional portrait or representation. So he's bringing together that idea of a sort of DNA bank that reminds us of our origins from one single amoeba going back billions of years. It's very clever. And it managed to encapsulate that sort of journey from a single cell to the complexity of life today.
I mean, this is the ultimate portrait, isn't it? It doesn't represent life, it is life. I think he's taken the idea of a portrait perhaps as far as you can take it, because DNA is what we're all made from. It's fundamental. So it doesn't represent us, it is us. And you wonder how much further the idea of a portrait could go.
So Marc Quinn has made a whole series of these extraordinary, I mean, really stunning bonsai in bronze. Bonsai, as we understand it, are trees that are stunted. they are held back through this very intrusive pruning. And it's a tradition that belongs to Japan and China and Taiwan. And so he sort of flips that on its head by magnifying the bonsai almost to kind of the dimensions of a tree we're more familiar with.
It's strange, isn't it? And it's a very strange tradition to me to control nature in that way. And this series of work is called Held by Desire, and the idea that these things fetch tens of thousands of pounds and live for, you know, tens of years, and there are different masters, different ways of making bonsai, different fashions and styles, and it's a whole world that he's dipping into and kind of alerting us to. I think Quinn alerts us to, for me, quite a strange and alien tradition of these beautiful but very controlled little plants, little objects, and there's a great tradition of having this relationship with a bit of nature that you utterly control, and this series is called Held by Desire, and to scale up something so fragile and delicate and expensive into a huge bronze sculpture is funny and surreal and bizarre, and I think rather beautiful.
Horticulture, of course, is that human control of botanical specimens, of plants. And so there's a very long history going back hundreds, if not thousands of years of this intervention and control. But the irony, of course, is this is now cast in bronze, wholly static. It is it's in that sense timeless and fixed and held in a suspension. But it allows us to look at all that extraordinary detail of the trees and the twisting bark and the pine needles. I mean, it's a really sort of fabulous work of sculpture.
And I think lots of his work talks about that, doesn't it? The idea that we want nature, but we want to buy a bunch of flowers from a garage or a supermarket. We want them to last forever. We want instant access to nice nature, controllable nature. And so a lot of the work is really about that kind of difficult relationship with nature. Here we're standing in front of a sculpture called Burning Desire, this huge red orchid made from metal, sprayed with car spray, this incredible colour. Standing in front of the pagoda, I mean, it's incongruous, it's beautiful, it's weird. It talks to the commodification of nature and back to kind of supermarket and garage flowers. And Quinn says it's also redolent of female genitalia.
He does, that's interesting. I mean, it's so sort of powerful, its presence in the garden. I mean, there's that irony, it's both very natural and an imposition. But it speaks to me too of the kind of seduction of nature, how luscious it is, how, you know, intriguing, how it, you know, well, it will pull in insects. And of course, our admiration for it as human beings, just admiring the aesthetics and beauty of flowers. But here on this vast scale, it's kind of like an Alice in Wonderland spectacle.
And I think Quinn talks about, you know, what if we left these things, they would take over, they would soon eat up our cities, which is, I suppose, quite an exciting prospect. But yeah, it's beautiful and weird, and as you say, completely natural and totally unnatural.
However, though, it does kind of remind us how we have historically always sort of shaped nature, made landscapes, built gardens. We have this exotic pagoda, this orientalist fantasy in the middle of southwest London. And accompanying it momentarily is this large, exaggerated, bombastic sculpture in the garden.
Yeah, we're in a completely beautiful and utterly artificial environment.
So Grace, we come to see this exhibition at Kew Gardens, and it's a really good example of how a contemporary artist will respond to a historic site and to a horticultural setting. We've got 17 sculptures by Marc Quinn in the garden at Kew. What do you think we learned from this visit, from this particular exhibition? How has Marc Quinn approached this particular project?
I think first he's collaborated with the people who work here, which is a good and respectful and interesting thing to do. So he's learned things. I think he's in a tradition of landscape architects. It's an artificial landscape which he's added to. And I think as a visitor, you not only look at the work, but you then begin to think about Kew, the work of Kew, the history of Kew. So it kind of gets you to zoom back in again. It's a clever thing to do.
And this is a very historic site and scientifically very important, because it really the institutions at the cutting edge of research into protecting plants, especially in the face of global warming. So he's sort of alerting us to that extraordinary power of nature, but also that sort of the idea of the natural, of beauty, of a kind of Arcadian setting. But there is sometimes something quite disturbing and disarming about these sculptures, almost as if they're going to kind of swallow you up.
You're right, they're not all pretty, are they? They're quite threatening. And a lot of the work talks to the idea of the control of nature. You think about the bonsai sculpture, the fact that we want flowers every day of the year from all across the globe. So he's looking at our controlling relationship with nature as well.
Yes, there is that notion of exploitation, of extraction, of making demands on the natural world for our own sort of gratification, or comfort, or advantage. But nevertheless, I think fundamentally, we are returned to the idea of this sort of promise and prospect of nature being sustaining and even improving to our state of mind, to our spirits.
So you think it's fundamentally optimistic?
Yes, I do. Yeah, it's quite sort of joyful exhibition.
Yeah, I'd agree.